try and influence, the national strategy for robotics in India, because as you all know, right now is a pivotal time to do this. You will see that politically a lot of, manufacturing bases are going to be set up in India, and with, forward-thinking movements like such strategy, we are looking at a very, let's say, a golden opportunity for India itself to become the manufacturing hub that we, let's say, missed in the 90s, and so on and so forth. So that's what I would like to say about this event itself. Apart from that, I am Gaurav Vikhe from Acceleration Robotics. We are a company based in Pune, and we basically build, semiconductor braids for ROS2. There's also Pallavi here from RigBetel Labs. I think I'll let Pallavi introduce herself, and then we can quickly move to the agenda.
Good morning, everybody. Pallavi here. I'm the co-founder at RigBetel Labs, and RigBetel Labs essentially works towards research and development and product development for companies in the field of robotics, particularly autonomous robotics. So ROS has been something which is the core to our work, to our tech stack, to in general, our lives sort of revolve around ROS, and that's how we're associated with it. And I'm so happy to have you all of here, at a Thursday morning discussing something related to national policies, which has not been something all of us engineers are very enthusiastic about, right? But it's a time where we can make a difference to it. So yeah, let's move on further with it. Thank you.
Akshata, if you could move to the next slide. Yeah. So essentially, the agenda for today is, we've covered the introduction by Gaurav Vikhe. So I'm very happy to let you guys know that we have a representative from MeitY joining us here. She is Kavita Bhatia. She's a scientist level G at MeitY, and she's the group coordinator for, AI and robotics at MeitY. So she'll be giving us the vision of the strategy. I'll hand it over to her first, and then we'll go through the rest of the agenda part by part. But you can see what the agenda is going to be like. So over to Kavita, ma'am.
Good morning, all of you. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am.
It's very good to see that we are having a good discussion on the national strategy on robotics. It's very nice to see that the industry is very enthusiastic about this strategy. I'll just touch upon a little bit of background and the vision of the strategy. In fact, you all must be aware that the Ministry of Electronics and IT has been implementing AI and emerging technologies. And in this regard, we started the implementation of National Program on AI. So while implementing the National Program on AI, we realized that we need to have a mission mode way so that we can have a holistic approach, and we need to have a cohesive strategy which will look into the recent developments of AI and also bridge the gaps with what we have been implementing in our country, like bridge the gap with respect to the compute, the data, the financing to the startups, the research and innovation, skilling being a very important aspect in any of the technology you talk about. And also, when you talk about AI and emerging technology, then data piece is a very important piece which can't be missed out. So with this background, we have come up with an India AI mission. In fact, I believe on this Monday or Tuesday, our Minister of State has launched a 7-committee report which talk about all these aspects which I touched upon. So while working on those reports and the mission, we realized that the robotics plays a very important role in enhancing the outcome of AI, because it is a cyber physical system which has a very important role in the entire ecosystem. So with this background, and also we were studying that the reports which were talking about that robotics has a very important role in enhancing the global value chain, and India's position in that respect, when we saw the report of 2021, was 12th position, while the other countries like US, China, Korea, Japan, and others were leading with us. And we studied sectors where they were working on, and when we want to work on which sectors should we prioritize in our strategy. So we saw that they were basically focusing on the industrial robot, and also we saw that the robots have a very important role when we talk about Make in India 2.0, because Make in India 2.0 has various items in it, and robotics has been put into one of it. And in fact, Indian Economic Survey 2017 had already said that robotics plays a very important role, and we all gear up on that. So this was the background where we come upon, and we started working on the national strategy on the robotics. And now we have been seeing that the current report, which is 2022 report, has a lot of improvements with respect to the India's ranking. We were 12, now we are 10, and we saw that the implementation of the industrial robotics in the current era has doubled. Earlier we were few, and now we are 33,000 implementations. And also, this will revolutionize the inclusive growth and also improve the standard of living in our country. So with all this background, we thought that we'll come up with a strategy with a very focused aim to have the potential of this transformative technology, and in order to make India as a global leader in currently we're talking about only few sectors, which is 4 sectors. We're talking about manufacturing, healthcare, agriculture, and national security. So we are only focusing our strategy is focusing on this, and we would like India to be a global leader in this 4 sectors by 2030. And Tanvi will talk about in detail the overview of the strategy and what are the pillars we are talking about. But we will be implementing this strategy in a mission mode manner. We'll be having a dedicated agency called Robotic Innovation in Unit, institutionalized in India, which will lead the implementation of this strategy. And we will be focusing on innovation, technology development in these sectors like industry, MSME, startups, and all. Basically, last, but I would like to touch upon is that the strategy focuses on 4 pillars, which is innovation, research and development, demonstration and testing, commercialization and supply chain, and adoption and awareness. And in all our programs, we also have awareness and adoption as one of the most important pillar, and we have put the thoughts in all these pillars, how we are going to implement. So Tanvi will take you through in detail about the robotic strategy, and I will hand over to Tanvi. Tanvi?
Right. Thank you, ma'am. If I could I'll just share my screen. I have a couple of slides to just showcase the approach that we'd undertaken to draft the strategy. I think I may need to be given access rights to share my screen.
Just a second.
Then can you try now?
Right. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Great. So I'll just carry forward from where ma'am left off, right? So our approach to the strategy has been quite holistic. We've been undertaking multiple consultations since the beginning of this year. We've spoken to a lot of folks who are present today during this call, from the industry, academia, from startups to VCs, to even government institutes, to understand what are the challenges that are being faced by the ecosystem. And how we approached this was in terms of sort of building this, what we call the robotics innovation cycle, broadly across the 4 pillars that ma'am mentioned, to be the research and development, demonstration and testing, commercialization and supply chain development, and adoption and awareness. We sort of pegged across all these 4 pillars the challenges that the ecosystem had mentioned to us, and tried to identify both from the demand and the supply side, what are the probable interventions that the government of India could sort of propose. So so, we have sort of identified, across these four broader categories, areas that are relevant where the government should sort of, put forth interventions to support the entire ecosystem. So if we talk about research and development, largely this was meant to sort of build the foundational ecosystem of robotics in India. We try to understand what are the challenges of the ecosystem faced and address these through three probable interventions, one being the centers of excellence in robotics. What we are at this point sort of, envisaging is a consortium of existing and new COEs that are working in AI, robotics, and other CPS systems, which would largely operate in a hub and spoke model. The idea behind these COEs was to also provide infrastructural support as well as undertake research, both foundational and applied research, across three broader research priorities that we want to sort of, build indigenous capabilities in. The other bit that we also recognized where India sort of, didn't have as much appetite was in taking up riskier research projects. These moonshot projects that we want to incentivize are largely the more ambitious and riskier projects, which are based on the more futuristic potential of robotics, where we haven't yet sort of had, first mover advantage to begin with. The third intervention within this category was regarding capacity building. So we understand that at this point of time, to even support the robotics ecosystem, there isn't enough technical capacity. And to sort of provide support from the government of India's end, we do want to provide dedicated programs in robotics in India, provide more sort of niche programs in robotics design, and also look forward to potentially collaborating with the broader international ecosystem through fellowships with the industry and academia. The entire objective of this pillar was largely to put forth a solid foundation for the robotics ecosystem in India and to make it a more whole of ecosystem approach where we're engaging with all potential sort of stakeholders and providing them the requisite support in, building more structural capabilities. Then we understood that to even sort of, have some sort of an uptake of robotic technologies, there is a both financial and from a regulatory perspective, a certain cost associated, which has made this technology sort of misunderstood and risky, and therefore limited the adoption of this technology in India, right? So to sort of provide intervention here, we try to address this through building both infrastructural capabilities as well as providing some amount of regulatory capacity building. We have provided intervention in terms of building demonstration centers. This is largely to put forward showcases of robotics and familiarize the industry with the potential of robotics as a technology. We're looking at building innovation test beds where we're providing infrastructural support to innovators to sort of tinker and experiment with the technology and build more innovative use cases. The regulatory sandbox, again, is one of the more innovative ideas of de-risking the technology and building regulatory capacity from a perspective of doing it collaboratively. So this is a more ambitious sort of intervention that we hope to sort of implement in the near future. And standard and certification is largely to sort of provide that quality assurance of the products that the Indian ecosystem is building and make our technology more sort of interoperable with the global ecosystem. Moving forward, we've sort of also understood that one of the more important pillars of the interventions that we're proposing is to sort of provide that fiscal infrastructural support to scale the technologies in India. We do understand at this point that there is a lot of potential within the Indian ecosystem that is still maybe limited to labs and R&D and does require some support from the government to scale and sort of reach the market. So to sort of implement that, come up with multiple such interventions, one being, say, funding the innovation in itself. So we're hoping to run pilot programs through challenges and hackathons where we plan on supporting fiscally innovators and startups to build Indian-centric solutions. We're looking at also sort of, more innovative funding mechanisms like fund of funds to see whether, we can sort of partner with the ecosystem in supporting innovators. A more targeted sort of approach was also providing through the robotics innovation unit that I mentioned, startup advisory support. And one such area where we did sort of receive feedback from the ecosystem was regarding providing IPR support services. So we would, of course, be providing support through the RIU on IPR as well as on other sort of, softer challenges like market access, partnership, mentorship support through industry, collaboration, and sort of ensure that our startups have the capacity to sort of be competitive with the global ecosystem. From a manufacturing perspective, and we did sort of touch upon this earlier when ma'am mentioned that, well, India has made a lot of significant growth in terms of industrial robots to sort of capitalize on this on the manufacturing potential of the country and to integrate ourselves further with the global value chain. We are looking at building dedicated industrial zones for robotics, where we are sort of aligning ourselves with, sort of supporting industries like, say, the automotive industry or, other sort of manufacturing zones within the country, where we'll provide infrastructure in terms of an integrated robotics manufacturing unit, providing plug-and-play where land and other utilities will be provided at subsidized costs to largely aggregate resources and sort of therefore integrate the supply chain of robotics in these particular zones. The one other area where we do sort of see there being a lot of sort of potential in supporting the robotics ecosystem is the fiscal incentives sort of measures that we're proposing in the strategy, where we understand that the robotics ecosystem is one where scaling has always been a challenge. So to sort of strategically address that particular impediment, we're looking at providing three types of fiscal and policy support. One being production incentive, where you've of course seen the benefit of the PLI scheme that the government has taken out. Now, other such schemes that the Ministry of Electronics and IT has taken out, such as the SPEC scheme, which is more capex based. So depending on what the technology is, what the use case is, we're looking at exploring potential such schemes to support the robotics ecosystem. The other bit is also sort of addressing the the duty structures, which are at this point maybe not the most supportive for the robotics ecosystem. And for this, we're proposing export incentives to promote access to the global market and ensure the scalability of the robotic technology in India, as well as rationalizing duty structures and building a map for the robotics ecosystem along with the industry, to sort of ensure that stability of import duty is something that is sort of preempted and strategically sort of built, and that sort of riskiness of these duty structures that these duty structures present is also sort of taken care of. The last measure is the ease of doing business measures, which are largely support in terms of single window systems or providing support in obtaining licenses and certifications, which are more sort of operational in nature and have been an impediment in sort of setting up businesses and industry in India. Lastly, we do understand that, while all of these pillars are helpful in scaling technology, again, in terms of resources, we do need to build internal capacity from a technical perspective too. And therefore, for that, we do plan on working with other line ministries like the Ministry of Skill Development and figuring out what could be the national occupational standards in the robotics industry. Providing training programs by augmenting the capacity of ITIs, polytechnics, so other training infrastructure in India to support the training of resources to build the robotics ecosystem in India. Lastly, while we did understand from a demand, from a supply perspective, the previous three pillars would be integral in ensuring that the Indian ecosystem is competitive. We also did recognize that one of the biggest sort of impediments in the ecosystem presently is the adoption of the technology in itself. So the last pillar is more sort of demand oriented, where we have again identified 4 broader interventions. One being broadening the market scope for robotic technology in India in itself. And from the government perspective, we're looking at sort of building, mechanisms for public procurement, building policy interventions where we can sort of standardize what would be the requirement of sort of robotic technology within the government, and therefore helping in the demand aggregation by being a user of robotic technology ourselves. The other more targeted approach within the public sector in itself is looking at building these technology adoption plans, working closely with line ministries like a Ministry of Agriculture to a Ministry of Health, and understanding where could robotic technologies essentially be utilized within their sector, and building these plans with them in terms of what are the potential use cases that we as the government of India should be supporting. On a very similar note, we're also looking at carrying out a similar exercise with the industry, where the Robotic Innovation Unit will be, helping the industry in coming out with a robotic utilization plan, where we'll be sort of identifying certain business processes across various industries that could be sort of standardized, and where robotics could sort of be integrated. And any advisory and uptake support would, of course, be then supported by the RIU in itself. Apart from this, we're also looking at, for use cases where in our priority sectors, probably coming up with maybe potential incentive mechanisms just for technology upgradation and adoption. We understand that apart from this, the domestic startup and MSME ecosystem in India also sort of lacks the competitive advantage in terms of gaining access to the international market. And we will therefore also be, exploring the potential of these international immersion programs, where we'll be collaborating bilaterally with, potential export markets in providing market access to our domestic ecosystem. From a governance perspective, of course, this is where we try to address the misconceptions and the risks that are associated with the robotic technology by providing guardrails in assessing the security, privacy, liability that is usually sort of associated with robotic technologies, and building pro-innovation sort of regulatory capacity through policy and other measures. Again, from an awareness and capacity building perspective, we understand that the potential of robotics presently is not quite, well understood, and sort of there is still some demystification required there. And to sort of get a head start in this particular domain, we plan on sort of working with schools, working with teachers in upskilling and sort of, building awareness of the technology through sort of leveraging our existing initiatives that the Ministry of Education or NITI Aayog might that are already in place to support the uptake of this technology. Apart from that, of course, we do recognize that although there are these challenges within the ecosystem presently, we have also been able to sort of come out in the forefront and are showing sort of, great potential in terms of innovation. And from the government's end, would also want to explore showcases and exhibitions to sort of, position India as the robotics innovation hub, and to sort of showcase the talent that we have been also supporting. Largely from an infrastructure perspective, again, we do understand that a lot of the uptake of this technology is then dependent on building the right networking infrastructure. And of course, building that low latency sort of cellular infrastructure to support the uptake of robotics at a national level. So of course, we do understand that this would require, working with multiple line ministries, working with the industry, the startups, academia, and other government agencies. And that is largely where, our governance mechanism comes in, which ma'am mentioned earlier, of the Robotics Innovation Unit, which will largely be undertaking the implementation of all the recommendations that are sort of put forth right now. So this has been our broader approach. We do look forward to sort of receiving your feedback on the recommendations made. I will also be sharing the link to the platform where we are seeking recommendations from the ecosystem on the chat here. I would encourage all of you, given your active sort of involvement in the ecosystem, to also put forth your recommendations. The platform is sort of seeking recommendations till 31st of October. So we do have still a couple of days left. We have seen participation so far. So would recommend you all to also sort of put forth your recommendations here. Thank you.
Could you share your screen again, please? Okay. Till then, I would like to introduce the next speaker. That's Syed Adil Hasan. He is the head of startups and communications at ARTPARK. ARTPARK, with regards to whatever Tanvi said so far, ARTPARK in its own way, it has some programs which do enable, for, let's say, startups to get the access to the resources that they need for building robotic systems. So I'd hand over to Adil now, and he can talk about the programs that are at ARTPARK, and then we'll move on to the next.
Sure. Hi, good morning, everyone. I hope I'm audible. I'll just do a quick few slides presentation. Allow me to share my screen. Yeah. Okay. I'll just take this. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm Adil. I lead the startup program at ARTPARK. Okay. So I'll just give you a quick glimpse. What is ARTPARK? What are we doing? How we are supporting these strategies in the robotics? How we are building the deep tech ecosystem in India and across the world. So we are AI Robotics and Technology Park, set up by the health of Department of Science and Technology, EST, and also the government of Karnataka under the NMICPS mission. We are 2.5 year old, or I should say 3 years old organization. So what we believe is we are here as a startup for the startups across. So what we do is we are incubatory for the next generations of robotics and AI startups in the developing world. Uh, so when we started the Art Park, this got incepted. There was a thought that the gap on the technology readiness level between 1 to 9 is 4, 5, 6, and we are here to address this gap and bridge this gap between the high tech research and the products. And how do we do this? So we work closely with governments, research, academia, and industry startup, and we try to bring all of them at one platform to discuss various policies, frameworks, upcoming changes. And we closely work with this with the various governments. You can see on the top level, and the industry startups on the bottom, and then on the left-hand side, you see the research academia, what we work. So what do we do exactly? We run basically three pillars of ARTPARK, which is venture creation, startup at ARTPARK. Platforms at ARTPARK is resource, test beds, data centers, which is the engines for productizations. And then skilling at ARTPARK, which is a training for the AI age, which is one of the very important aspect of it. And what are the domains specific area? Industries, mobility, anything with the UGV, UAV, health, intelligent healthcare, and agri-tech. These are the domains focus area, what we do it. So I'll just give you briefly how we do stand out from the rest of the incubation and acceleration program, majorly in the robotics, deep tech, AI, what we have been focusing, and look forward to the roadmap for the next 20 to 30 years in India. So we run a 3 curated program for the deep tech startups, which is Spark, Ignite, and Boost. I'll just very superficially touch upon each of it. Spark is the I should say, the mentorship platform where these budding entrepreneurs in non-incorporated startups comes in. We look forward to have them on board after the various filtration, iteration, selection process. They come and we give them the 4 months of course where we take them through the journey of understanding what they're trying to build through the various workshop. They get understanding of the market, readiness, access, user journey, probably the storytelling attributes to fundraising telling attributes. And then over the 4 months, we let them know that, okay, fine, now you can assess yourself whether you are able to take your startups to the next level, whether you can incorporate as a startup. So in a nutshell, we save the journey of actual startups when they try hands and build something. So this is the Spark program, and it's open for everyone, whether it's students at second year or the faculty, or even someone in the enterprise with the retiring at their level. So it's open for all of them. The second is the Ignite, which is the flagship program of ARTPARK, which we look forward again, aspiring entrepreneurs, non-incorporated startups, just an idea with the TRL level 0 to 1. And we help them and we build them in the next 24 months to the technology readiness level at 7 to 8 and exit them as a startup. What we do is we provide 365 support to this Ignite program, where we believe that these deep tech ecosystem is not. So what we need to do is we give them everything from the fundraising to facilities to labs to market access to get them go-to-market strategy to financial governance to human resource governance. And then in the next 2 years, when they get mold to become a startup, we exit them and then we provide them the space where they can manufacture the hardware of the robotics and others components. We call it Art Garage, a facility recently launched by ARTPARK. It is a 75,000 square feet space where all the startups can come and manufacture their products and also do a various testings across this. I'll talk more about it little in the next slide. And the boost is the more of the partnership program where we look forward incorporated startups to be a part of the ecosystem. And we do various synchronization with them, opening AI labs in the rural part of the India and bunch of other initiatives we do in the boost category. This is the first cohort of the startups which is graduating from the Art Park as of now. And I'll also invite next speakers, Kaushik, to develop more because he's one of the entrepreneurs who's working on this Thora Robotics. So I'll not take that. I'll just give you a glimpse that these startups have not been supported, but have been created within the Art Park as a center of excellence with the support of governments, both from the national and the regional part of it. And I'll not go too detail. I'll allow Kaushik, when he is discussing, he'll pick up these and talk about it more. I'll just show you the glimpse of Art Garage, which is one of the facility which we opened for the facility for manufacturing and prototyping and testing for the robotics and the deep tech startups in India. It's one of the first kind happening in India, and it is in the Bangalore. Yeah, if you want to know more details about it, you can scan us here in the QR code. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. So I'd then introduce the next speaker, who's Kaushik. Kaushik, as Adil said, is one of the startups incubated at ARTPARK, and that dovetails with my point that ARTPARK has been encouraging a lot of startups to be, to get the resources that they require to enable us to develop the robotic ecosystem that we want in India. About Kaushik, he is the founder at Thora Robotics, as you saw in the previous slide. He's also a member of the Plugin Alliance Special Robotics. Plugin Alliance is a incubator accelerator by Intel, and he is a part of the robotics interest group within it. And just a point to note over here that he has already made recommendations to the National Strategy on Robotics, which have been incorporated. So as you can see that the government currently is very open to feedback, and I would encourage every other participant here to do the same. Over to Kaushik to talk about his work and what suggestions he made.
Yeah, thank you all for making time. So I'll kind of segue from where Adil left off, just confirming if you can all hear me and see the screen.
Yes.
Great. So again, I represent ARTPARK, first of all, to summarize the pre-venture work that's been happening. These are yet to be incorporated startups in the making and completely conceptualized and under development at ARTPARK. And as Adil mentioned, we're looking at development of full systems, such as these, really complex legged walking robots that, found their roots at IISc Bangalore and have now been converted into full-fledged pre-ventures with a business plan with the objective of taking it to the market. Then we have cargo carrying drones of various payloads that are being developed. So these are full robotic systems. And it ties to the point of, while there's a lot of robotics work in India, there's, a substantially lower fraction that is actually manufactured in India. And that is what ARTPARK, through, this support from the Ministry of Heavy Industries, is trying to solve. So these two systems, along with focus at energy management, so we have autonomous charging systems and battery management systems that are being developed for both, flying or aerial and ground robots, as well as smart controllers for drones that are being developed in-house right here in ARTPARK IISc. There's also human robotic interaction, or HMI, that's being developed in enabling network robotics and the potential of robotics from anywhere and how that can impact actual work. And the effort that I am personally involved directly is Gati Robotics or Thora Robotics. The names have been kind of modified very recently, so apologies for that confusion. But we're looking at the building blocks for robots. So the base, the actuators or the joints that control the motion of robots, as well as grippers and so on, are something that we are looking at. And I give a quick glimpse of what a typical day at ARTPARK might be from the view of our work. We right from, the platform that ARTPARK provides is very unique because you could be doing CAD design, you could be doing rendering, you could be doing simulations of physics-based analysis of all these products. You could do testing, of all kinds of materials, of systems, of subcomponents, and actually all the way to the end consumer or the client. So that kind of a unique platform is something that's to be sought after, and I'm thanks to MeitY and the policy for recognizing ARTPARK and cameras officially in the policy itself as something that is working towards this end. So I also, as Gaurav mentioned, I'm also part of the Plugin Alliance special interest group. So I'll just switch over to that real quick. So Plugin Alliance is a very unique alliance, as the name suggests. It's a unique coming together of industry, enterprises, startups, and government organizations. So as of now, there's about 120 members, comprising of 40 plus enterprises, 18 investors, so venture capitalists, angels. They're all part of that, and ARTPARK representing some of the government and industry-based bodies as part of Plugin. And we have a special interest group dedicated to robotics, and that discusses topics through this whole gamut of members to figure out how can we improve the ecosystem in robotics and the adoption, and to the points that Tanvi had mentioned. And credit to Tanvi and Kavita ma'am and the whole team at MeitY to work with Plugin and the SIG and in improving that. So I'll go over. This is a summary of the special interest group that I'm a co-chair of. So we have folks from TVS Motors, SK Vijay sir is head of the Digital Center for Excellence at TVS, and Sampath from Tech Mahindra. We have representation from Adani Power, Sandeep himself, Bosch, Intel, and other facets in the robotics industry. So when you look at the policy, it's again a very well drafted and thought through policy, and the kind of recommendations that all of us collectively came together were mostly from the point of view of opportunities for startups, to enabling ecosystem from the point of view of training, both the folks who would manufacture your robots as well as service them, and as well as government interventions in terms of certifications, safety, and those aspects. So I mean, I'm happy to report that all of this effort began in February, and they've been working continuously, iteratively seeking feedback from Plugin or other facets of the industry. And the current strategy, as all of you, I'm just showing you the strategy itself. I mean, for those of you who have not had the chance to go through it, I would highly recommend to give the whole document a read, and especially come back all the way down to section 7, that is the strategic recommendations. Tanvi did a great job of summarizing it, but I'm really happy to report that the recommendations on building manufacturing capability, because advanced complex systems such as robots require advanced manufacturing, and that requires investment in the ITI or the skill development and upgradation of the existing manufacturing labor force, as well as certifications. And that's something that the RIU would focus on, to enable certifications for robots in India, and that will propel growth from that point. So the more robots that all of us end up building towards a common set of certifications and standards would help ease the adoption. That is the biggest challenge at the forefront, where convincing an MSME or any business unit to adopt robotics or automation will become much easier. So I think with that, I'll end here and just conclude with the fact that the time is now, and the strategy is a really forward-looking, well-drafted and evolving one. And I would encourage all of you to provide your recommendations and see them through.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kaushik. So before I make my recommendations, Akshata, please share your screen. Before I make my recommendations, I would like to thank all the speakers before me to have joined this session and give their valuable feedback, especially Kavita ma'am and Tanvi for representing basically the architects of this strategy. So thank you so much. Thank you to Adil and Kaushik also for like bringing ARTPARK to the forefront here, and how it is also in its own way enabling especially startups, to build a robotics ecosystem here. Now, with regard, I and Pallavi will be speaking a bit about what we think should be the recommendations that need to be added. So yeah, obviously the policy does talk about financial easing in some manner to be to enable us to get competitive advantage. And I believe that the actual competitive advantage for Indian robotics companies lies in the fact that we make robots which serve the world. Given the fact that labor costs are cheaper in India, and as the policy also notes the fact that robots are inherently expensive, right? So we need to basically be making robots for markets which really are short on labor and can afford robotic systems to in everyday jobs, in everyday services. So the document does talk about two important challenges when it comes to robotics manufacturing. One is increased import dependencies, and second is high costs. I would like to frame the challenge a bit differently. For India to be competitive in the export market, the single most important thing that matters to, at least as a startup running in Pune, is the fact that you need to reduce costs in some manner. And Tanvi did mention this in her talk, that we need to enable some sort of customs reduction for this to happen. That now, if you look at, like, this is my and Pallavi's and any number of startups that we've spoken to, this is our everyday experience, that if you try to get something from outside, and currently, just to note here that, yeah, we are just beginning our, let's say, our manufacturing phase, that India as a country is going to become a manufacturing hub, but that ecosystem development will easily take 5 to 10 years, right? So there needs to be something which, startups like ours can do in the short term, and that doing in the short term basically means that we need to get the robotic components that we need to make the eventual robotic systems that we want at a price which is competitive. Because we are currently looking at situations where the customs duties increases the cost of each of the components that we get to a higher level, right? So that's something which doesn't, dovetailing with my previous point, it doesn't make us competitive on a larger scale. And also, this also adds to the fact that currently, as I said, that robotics and manufacturing is in its nascent stages. So we don't really have startups which are flush with capital, right? If we were flush with capital, and if we had amazing burn rates that the US can afford, then absolutely, then I wouldn't complain about this customs tax at all. But that's not the case. So for us to leverage this point where forward-looking policies like this exist, and the world over recognizes that India has to be the next manufacturing hub due to whatever geopolitical reasons, but it's time that at least in the short term, because there are a lot of startups in India in robotics. Like there's this joke that we have, especially when it comes to Bangalore, that if you throw a stone, you're going to hit a robotics startup founder for some reason. So that's the situation that we have. And the one thing that all of us vie for is the fact that the components that we need with regards to building our robotic systems, they are coming at a huge cost. And therefore, and because of them, like, there is a demand problem here, that we can't really import all of these things, which also increases our dependence on China because they are cheaper. And I don't want to get into why the China dependency is bad, but either way, the great components come from the West, and we need to enable us to get them at a price which is competitive. So that's the main point that I'd like to drive forth. That and I would urge any other startup members who've joined that please try and make this recommendation. The policy does recognize this as a problem, and I also recognize that for us to develop all of this in-house in India, it's going to take some time. So, but for the short term, we need something which enables a lot of robotic startups like ours to be able to create competitive products. So I see the long-term vision, and national strategies are supposed to be long-term visions. They are 5-year, 10-year plans, but we need something in the short term. So that's the one recommendation. That's the one recommendation that I have, that I would strongly urge everyone else to also make, because that's the one small blind spot that I saw in this entire document. Apart from this, all of it is amazingly forward-looking. It's very surprising that if you look at, if you look at the strategy, the countries that are being cited are, East Asian tigers and the US. So for us to, have a policy like this is very forward looking. So I really like the document, but just this small blind spot that I saw, which I would, if Tanvi and Kavita ma'am, and if you could incorporate this, it would really help us out. So that's the one thing that I have to say. Oh, over to, Tanvi has something to say.
Right. I just wanted to sort of address that, concern. And I think it's very like fairly put and well thought out, because that, as you mentioned, I think all of your peers have sort of put that as a recommendation pre-factor to us also like writing this strategy. I think from a perspective of incorporating it in the strategy, and I'd also like, defer to you all to maybe help us also refine it further within the part of fiscal incentives under commercialization. We talk about trade incentives. So the Ministry of Electronics and IT, as you know, like smartphones for us has been one of the best sort of possible policy measures that the government has been able to call a success story. So to be able to indigenize that in India, the government of India had come up with this phased manufacturing plan. If you guys will give it a read, it's largely about how we built a roadmap along with the industry in taking the bill of material for a particular smartphone, figuring out what were the key components that were being imported, and building that duty structure, the roadmap for how to sort of scale that duty structure over the years to ensure that okay, maybe in the beginning of the few years it's slightly lower, right, and then over the next 5 years it sort of increases. And thereby like making this 5-year roadmap along with the industry, ensuring that there is stability given to the ecosystem on what would the duty structures look like in the next 5 years, and also how that would therefore amount to the other policy measures that we provide. So this phase manufacturing plan was actually the stepping stone for the smartphone manufacturing being indigenized in India. And we do see, given that robotics is a game of scale, to sort of also bring a certain similar measure for this particular technology. But we'll be more than happy to sort of incorporate a more refined version basis your recommendations.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'd like to, okay, Kaushik also wants to make a point.
Yeah, just had a quick comment here. In fact, there is something related to the production linked scheme for robotics that's in the works. It's not formalized, but the way, and again, your point is well taken, and we feel the same, and we are actually trying to solve your problem on a longer term at ARTPARK, where we're trying to build the components that you're trying to source from abroad. But while that's going to take time, as you rightly mentioned, what actually might unfold in terms of policy or financial incentive is, as you sell your valued robotics components at the cost that you bear with your production, you would have incentives that will bring down the effective cost to the consumer, so you'll be competitive in the market. Something similar to what the US does with EVs, and even India is doing in EVs in that segment. So something similar for robotics is in the works, and that would be only few eligible like startups working in robotics would definitely be eligible to avail that kind of an incentive. So what that might do is kind of solve both the problems at once, because opening up or reducing customs for import would then proliferate the amount of imports that we already have, which is tens of thousands of crores in robotics. So that at the same time enabling the current robotic startups to use imported hardware to provide value-added services on the robots that you sell would help you make best with both worlds. So that's in the works. That's something I can vouch for as well.
I'd just like to make one small point here. I think accelerating the imports, at least in the short term, really helps with technology transfers. This is something that you see across countries, that the moment, I mean, there's China, there's Taiwan, there's Japan, where the moment they get, foreign entities in there, the technology transfer happens within a few years. So I think like this would really help us. And thank you so much for, taking this feedback and willing to incorporate that in the strategy itself. Yeah, thanks. And I would like to hand over to Pallavi if she has any additional points to make, and then we can open it to the general audience.
Thank you. So I think, most of the points are pretty well covered, right? So I think the only waiting game here becomes on how well is it implemented and actually monitored as well. Because the only issues with implementations that we see when they're not monitored very well, or we think we have everything at access, but the whole access points itself are not very accessible. So I think that's the only review that I would have, that the entire plan seems to be something that we as a startup community have been discussing since way long now, probably since incubation is when we're seeing like, okay, we fall short in talent, we fall short in hardware, and both of those points are very well addressed, that how we can actually develop getting more people in this ecosystem, or enhancing the incentives that people have to actually get into this whole community and the ecosystem in together. So yeah, I think I am pretty much done from my end, and we'll open the floor for others to actually add in their points or to ask questions if they have any.
Yeah, so if anybody has any points to make from the audience, please go ahead. And yeah, I see someone's raised their hand.
This is Manohar. A quick question, not a comment. I'll come back with. Is there people in the universities part of this committee which drafted this? And second question is, are there any agricultural farm robotic entities or universities part of this activity?
Right, I'll take that. Thank you for your question. In terms of the consultation process, we have reached out to a lot of academic partners, and we have incorporated their recommendations too. Agriculture specifically, so far, the way the process works is, before we open it out for public feedback, we also have an interministerial consultation. So the draft had been circulated with the Ministry of Agriculture, and of course with therefore assigned autonomous agencies also. So we have definitely also incorporated their feedback, and as you'll see in the strategy, agriculture is actually one of our priority sectors. So we ensure that from a use case perspective, that will also be prioritized.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else who would like to make any points, please come forward. I think, as you can see that Tanvi, who's the consultant here, she is very open to feedback. So if you have to make any points, make them now. And okay, yeah. Just a second. Can someone allow Arthur to speak, the co-host, please? I don't know why I can't do this. Arthur, you can go ahead. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you for hosting this awesome event. My one feedback or request would be if there's any way for making data and sort of scale data sets available for training, the artificial intelligence component for robotics. Because if you think about, whether it's mapping systems or computer vision, or even being able to integrate with the latest technology developments, a lot of that data tends to be proprietary, and the lack of access to that puts us a bit on the back foot. If there's anything in the strategy that could make these data sets available, either through academia or partnership with industry, I think that would really give us a step forward.
Right. No, thank you so much for your question. And that's a very, well-timed question also, because as you may have heard Kavita ma'am, who'd spoken before me, also mention. So as the Ministry of Electronics and IT, given that AI is something we're looking after, actually come up with this broader India AI mission, which largely as a sub part of it looks as data as a particular vertical. We are actually coming up with the national data governance policy, which will be looking at how to sort of govern non-personal data. And within that policy in itself, there is the mention of this program called the India Datasets Program, which largely addresses your very concern about how to essentially curate and make accessible data sets for artificial intelligence, right? So it is going to be a program that we are working upon. It is something that we've already gotten funding from MeitY, and we're sort of working towards the implementation of it. So while it's not directly a part of the strategy, it's definitely something that the government has already sort of formulated a policy intervention for and is also already implementing. In terms of access to the data sets, we're also looking at building a separate platform where we're aggregating these curated data sets, which are, not just the open data sets, but also ones which are, annotated, curated, more amenable for research and training of models, and making that accessible through this particular platform. So that is also in the works. It should also hopefully be launched soon. So therefore, that should take care of this concern. And it's again aligned. Robotics is also within the same India AI mission, so there will definitely be synergies within the implementation of the strategy as well as the data sets program.
Got it. That's really great to know. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Are they, okay. Yeah, Saurabh, please go ahead.
Hi, my question is relating to multi-agent systems. So, because now most of the robots have different communication standards, right? Are you concentrating on trying to set up a single channel, sort of a standard for communication between robots? Yeah, in terms of fleet interoperability, communication between robots, the two standards that are coming up right now, mass robotics and VDA 50/50. Have you looked into any of that and tried to bring into this strategy and are trying to push it onto the current sort of development cycle?
Great. Thank you for your question. I think that's a very pointed question. And to just sort of brief you there, we have been in touch with BIS and, have sort of given recommendations to them on what the industry particularly requires right now. So these are two separate sort of efforts in that sense. Whereas the national strategy, as Kaushik also rightfully and mentioned, is a broader roadmap in itself, right? So the more pointed interventions, which are more implementation oriented, like, say building particular standards, is not something that we've covered within the strategy, but in its implementation, definitely we'll be sort of looking at, ensuring that the international standards that are being formulated and implemented right now also contextualized to the Indian ecosystem. And for this particular instance, we are already in touch with BIS. And as for what they have informed us, they are more than happy to sort of, receive feedback from the industry on what the standards would be that they require, and would be happy to make committees and take it formally forward. So in case this is something that you would want to sort of see implemented in the short term, we can definitely sort of facilitate that through BIS.
Okay, before anyone asks a question, I just wanted to dovetailing with what Arthur mentioned. So he mentioned about the data side of things. I wanted to know what is the government's current, let's say, thought process with regards to getting GPUs. I mean, letting GPU access to the greater public. I did read recently that the government has bought or is in plans to buy a huge GPU cluster. But I just wanted to know how that whole framework works. Yeah, that's it.
Right, fair. No, I think that's again well-timed question. In terms of GPU, what our broader strategy is. Again, I'll urge you to probably refer to even the document that Kavita ma'am mentioned regarding these 7 subcommittees that were formed. So earlier on this year, our Honorable Minister of State had sort of formed these 7 subcommittees on what the broader sort of pillars and components of the AI ecosystem that the government needs to intervene on are. Right. One of them was, of course, compute. And within the committee reports that have been released as of just earlier on this week, we do identify a broader sort of approach on how we want to make this accessible. Right now, the entire objective around this is to make compute accessible to startups, researchers within India. The format of implementation is still being contemplated. Of course, in the interim, we do have, you may have heard of CDAC. So we do have CDAC supported facilities. We have air hours that we've taken out, which is slightly more GPU heavy in that sense. But in terms of making a dedicated setup of GPU-based sort of compute systems, that is still in the works. The strategy for it in itself of how we plan on implementing that, I can also just find out the link and share it in the chat here. That is what we're contemplating, what the industry and academia has sort of recommended, the more sort of preferable approach to be. So we are working with them right now on formulating how we'll implement that. But the report should be a good head start for the ecosystem to understand how the government will be taking this forward.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for that. Are there any other further questions? Yeah, Vishwas, please go ahead. Then we can go back to Manohar, sir.
Hi. First of all, thank you for this event and good discussion. It's rather a request that everyone is mentioning this document and the committees, like the 7 committees that Tanvi recently mentioned, and the like the reports that published by them. Can you just share a link or anything related where we can find these reports and this particular strategy document as well? That would be great. Thank you.
So yeah, on that front, I will coordinate with Tanvi, and since I think most of the attendees have filled the interest form that we put out, so I'll be sending over these documents over through email to you folks. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm more focused on this agri robotics or farm robotics. My suggestion here is there was a 4 years or 5 years back, there was an IEEE committee on farm robotics for India, and it was headed by Professor Lakshmidhar Behera, and it was published to Government of India and IEEE. I don't know where it went. I was part of that committee, but I'm just reiterating that basic thing there. I'm from Green Robo Missionary in a farm robotic company. My suggestion is to form a very focused farm robotic uh, entity or whatever from Government of India or funded as a PPP, whatever, to focus on very, very specific crops, probably like pomegranate or cotton or something like that. And that's my view of how to take this to a commercial stage. Otherwise, it's just a technology lab. A lot of people in the universities are working on what I call as farm robotics, but it is just a lab academia kind of effort there, which never going to see the light. And many people just from the academia come to me, and we are going all around. But I think that something like a art park for farm robotic has to be specifically formed. That's my opinion.
Thank you, sir, for that suggestion. Is there anyone else who would like to make a point? Yeah, please go ahead, Pallavi. No.
Yeah, so Tanvi, just one question there. Like we spoke a lot about R&D throughout the document, right? So R&D needs to be the core if we have to reach that whole 2030 goal. But I'm trying to draw parallels to two particular industries here, one being the automotive and second being the IT industry, because these have been the two most revolutionary industries for India. So even at IT, for that matter, when NASCOM was formed and the way it was supposed to work towards, right? It kind of drew in a lot of capacity from the services companies or the R&D companies that actually helped to build a very strong base, which was through academia and through industry linking together. And somewhere or the other, I'm not sure if I'm choosing the right words here, but we're all, particularly private companies, are scared of the whole red tape from the government, right? The whole bureaucracy is something that we're not very good at dealing with, and NASCOM came out as a way that we could sort of not indulge much in the bureaucracy and still get up to the ladders where we could progress well with the whole field. Is something like that in picture for the robotics ecosystem or for the AI ecosystem, wherein people from the services front are much more in the leading drive?
Right, absolutely. So you may have heard the mention of the robotics innovation unit as we were sort of, envisaging it. Right now, in terms of how that will be structured, is something that will again be, open to feedback on. But given that we're conceptualizing it as an independent agency, largely meant to sort of, work with the ecosystem in implementing the strategy, therefore that should sort of bridge the gap between government initiatives and how the ecosystem would want to engage with the government. So then this is top down, right? Like right from our minister's vision on this. The idea is to build an agency that is most involved with the ecosystem and being able to translate the ecosystem's need into what the strategy wants to sort of achieve. And therefore, there has been, as Kaushik also mentioned, a lot of effort put into ensuring that what the ecosystem requires is what is translated into the strategy. Because, I think it is, given that it's in its nascent stages right now, the technology in itself, or the ecosystem in India in itself, there is a need to sort of do this collaboratively, and that need is also being put on the forefront in the strategy. So we'll be happy to sort of take feedback on how you want the RIU2 in itself be conceptualized. What would the independent agency look at, look for you? So I mean, we're happy to take those comments also. Again, as I mentioned, given that it's a strategy, things are largely meant to be from a more strategic point of view, a roadmap point of view, and not as a policy instrument in itself. So yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, my last question. You said 31st is the last day for inputs, and when do you expect all this to be rolled out and published, and what are the other timelines?
Right. I think timelines for those are, I think I probably can't give you a hard date in that sense, but given that we've already received public feedback, largely how these things work is that the feedback will now be incorporated into the strategy, and a final strategy will be released. And right parallelly across that, the implementation work begins. Right. So once the strategy is out, the ministry will also start working on, firming up the recommendations that have been put forth, and therefore the implementation. So these processes, once the closure of the public consultation, should all sort of be done parallelly, and we do see a lot of appetite and so right from the top to sort of work towards the implementation at the earliest.
Yeah, Sarvesh, please go ahead. Sarvesh, you're still on mute.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, I think I've full disclosure. I've just skimmed through the whole draft over there, and it's very well thought of. But this is just more like a comment than a recommendation. So, uh, two actually. So one is robotics is really hard, right? Like it's not like you need a lot of different skill sets, hardware, software, um AI. It's a mixed bag, and we don't really have the chipset required, right? We are very much dependent on other countries to make a full-fledged system per se. So I would just like to, somewhere in the strategy, I feel that is missing, like, in terms of skill sets. Like, I mean, like places like artwork, the place at Bangalore, of course, are really helpful in developing those hard skills. But I think this should be like it's deep tech, and it takes longer to go to market in that sense. So somewhere that should be covered up, or that should be taken into consideration. And second is why don't we think in terms of clusters? I think someone pointed out, like Manohar, I think, where we can just focus on key problems just for India. So it is good thinking to build for the world from India, but we ourselves have a lot of challenges just meant for us. So could the strategy be thought in terms of specific verticals? May it be farming, may it be manufacturing, may it be even international world class standards, may it be safety, robotics. So I think the strategy could be different for these verticals. I might be wrong, but obviously there is some commonality between all of this robotics. But the inherent challenge differs from case to case and application to application. So obviously just two comments over there, and could that be thought about it, or what is the government's take on it? Thanks.
No, thank you so much for your question. In terms of the first part of it, that is the skill sets for chip design specifically, right? So in terms of the feedback that we received so far, it was, of course, recognizing, as you said, like the complexity of robotics as a discipline in itself, and therefore the need to having dedicated coursework and dedicated training, primarily just for robotics. And we try to address that by saying that, we'll try promoting dedicated undergraduate, postgraduate degrees in robotics, different from mechanical engineering and the lot. The other bit that we also received as feedback was the design aspect of it. So in terms of the specificity of the skill set, the strategy right now does not write down what particular skill sets will be promoted, but has given areas of where there will be intervention. So from a design perspective, to having a more overarching a dedicated coursework for robotics is something that we've considered. However, if you do think that from a degree perspective or a skill set perspective for chipset design specifically, there are other sort of nuances we should keep in mind in terms of other disciplines that should also be focused on. We'd be happy to take that feedback and incorporate that. The other bit of it being more from a identifying use cases specific for India and building an ecosystem around that to sort of promote that has been something we've tried to sort of keep at the forefront of conceptualizing the strategy. There's a part of this strategy where we're talking about commercializing innovation, and we talk about how India-centric applications are going to essentially be sort of promoted and promoted through funding, through advisory, and the other sort of tools and mechanisms that we listed down. We've also sort of tried to structure this around 4 priority sectors to begin with. 2 of them that you mentioned, agriculture, manufacturing, and how we do foresee this in its implementation phase. So as I mentioned, the strategy will be a broader roadmap. The next step will be building a more targeted policy framework on how the implementation will take place. And therefore, there we will definitely take this consideration into point where we will ensure that from the sectors and the use cases that we plan to prioritize, there are targeted interventions for the set. I think that's a fair point.
Yeah, thank you for your comment there. It's a good thing that you're thinking it through, but somewhere I feel medical, for instance, could be another vertical that we need. Like obviously we have a young population now, but you can only imagine 20 years, 30 years down the line, we'll have the most like aged population. So the time is now, and we need to incorporate medical as well. I can see there's robotics, especially for elderly population, of course. But we don't have an elderly population. But the world is like in the Western. Like I'm based in Europe, so over here the manufacturing, they have something called as gigafactories and mega factories, which can manufacture everything, and like the robots will be eventually plug and play and manufacture different sets of things rather than one specific thing. So even concepts like those, like gigafactories, wherein we can have uh, we can repurpose the same assembly line for different products. So maybe that could be one of the things that even we can think of. And thank you for organizing this as well. Thanks.
Right. Thank you for that comment, Sarvesh. I'll just close that off by saying that the point on the integrated manufacturing facilities, we are looking at incentivizing plug and play facilities, and India has definitely been able to sort of build capabilities there with the automotive and the electronics manufacturing clusters that we built, especially across the southern belt. So that is something that we're looking at for robotics also, definitely.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks, Sarvesh, for your comments and Tanvi for the response. We have the last 10 minutes. So, Aditya, go ahead. And anybody else, just keep your hands raised.
Yeah, this is just extending on the question that I think Arthur had raised about open data and probably about open standards also. I think it's Saurabh had raised. Is there any consideration for open source development as a means of accelerating progress? Let's say a case in point being ROS, the robot operating system, right, which we're all talking about, and how it has really accelerated the whole robotics adoption the world over. Is there any consideration like that from the government side for accelerating development, point one, and also to improve or enable training? So obviously the government can't reach every organization, every institute for training. So what they can probably do is have some nodal institutions, the more recognized IITs or NITs, to help develop these open source either softwares or hardwares, and which can be easily accessed by all the other institutions as well. And also which can be used by commercial entities to speed up the development without having to reinvent the wheel. So this will kind of accelerate the development, point one, and enable training for a much broader audience. And also, I think all the trained individuals can directly come into the industry and get working without having to undergo further training in whatever the industry is building. So is there any consideration like that for promoting open source from the government side?
Right. I think the way that the strategy is sort of tackled that has been a little more overarching from the perspective of, putting down interventions like the innovation test bed, where we've said that infrastructure and say supporting facilities will be provided to essentially tinker, experiment, and build those like open source sort of applications. In terms of like building like a ROS for India, there were like divided sort of inputs we received from the industry, and we do understand the dependency on ROS right now. And I think from a perspective of promoting open source, the strategy is taken more of a stand of providing the infrastructural and the funding support to enable or accelerate, as you put, innovation to be the way that the government would want to support open source innovation. Yeah, I think you sorry, I didn't get your last question. Was there also around how else the innovation can be accelerated?
No, it's primarily about maybe there's specific projects of funding that is given for developing these open source applications. So it's not.
Absolutely. So from a funding perspective, we are, as I mentioned, looking at supporting Indian use cases, looking at more innovative mechanisms. Of course, there are challenges, hackathons. We're looking at supporting piloting of programs for these particular identified problem statements. Of course, they're all being conceptualized right now. When we look at the implementation of the strategy, it will be more targeted to what these Indian use cases would look like and where the government would want to provide more targeted funding. But yeah, I think that is how the strategy is probably, placing sort of importance on supporting the acceleration of innovation.
Understood. Yes. And it need not be restricted to India itself, right? We can be more global in our approach. So it need not be India-specific problems. That is obviously the focus. But I think we can go more broader in our perspective and look at global problems as well. There are common things that everybody uses. So maybe that will give us a name on the global platform, let's say. So yeah, that's just a comment. Thanks.
Yeah, just like minor points with adding on to what Aditya said, I think serving the global market is in our interest, at least in the short term, because that's how innovation happens. Like if you are put to the test of the global markets, that's how you quickly adapt to things. That's the only minor point that I wanted to make. And I think adding on to what Aditya said about the government, let's say, supporting open source work, a very recent example of the same would be what happened at IIT Madras with the mobile operating system that they developed. So if initiatives like that can be supported, that would be great. These are the 2 points that I wanted to make. I think Saurabh and Rajan are waiting. Saurabh, please go ahead. Then Rajan will take it through.
Yeah, thank you. So my question is regarding, so in your report, you have listed down focus areas, right? So for example, let's say you are developing a wheelchair for a hospital. That so the standards that it needs to conform to need not be medical specific standards, but they need to be autonomous driving specific standards, right? And let's say surveillance, you have aerial robots. They need to conform to DGCA standards rather than the standards for making defense standards. And so, have you thought of setting up any committee to handle robots based on configurations rather than the field in which they're working?
Right. I think that's a very fair point. And I think, I'll come back to the approach aspect here, where, say, when we're talking about standards and certification, the strategy will, go as far as saying that, we're going to uh, augment capacity of conformity assessment bodies. We'll look at, ensuring there's interoperability of standards. And, the strategy's mandate is to essentially, provide strategic direction from that perspective. But of course, when it comes down to the implementation of it, right, like just in sort of even the sectors that we've mentioned, we understand that the diversity of use cases in itself will require a more targeted approach. To begin with, the use cases we've listed are very indicative. That's just to show the potential of robotics within that sector. But nonetheless, from a standards perspective, we are, as I mentioned earlier, already in conversations with BIS on how to sort of align ourselves with, say, the industry requirements there. And not just BIS, of course, that would also require other sort of sectoral bodies to also be involved. And that will be something that is considered during implementation. And of course, that'll happen through forming a committee and, the other sort of due processes.
Thank you.
Rajan, please go ahead. We have the last 5 minutes.
Yeah. So hey guys, I'll cut it short. So everybody has like pointed out everything, and I would like to just ask one thing. I know India is moving towards having the robotics built in India, and not so sure how much you guys know, but the market in India is drastically growing, as you mentioned in the report as well. We have grown from 33,000 units in 2021 to up to, like, I don't know what the number is as of now, but it has doubled or 4 times as of now. We do assemble robots of every industry, of every, be a service robot or industrial robot in India. But the only question I have is, what exactly is government doing so that the semiconductor that goes into that robot, that actually makes that robot work, is being made in India? I know we have a semi setup in Gujarat coming up in 2030, but is it going to take 20, 30 plus 10 years to get that semi in the robot that is going to be built in India, or is going to go early before that?
Right. I think I may not be the best person to sort of, question the semiconductor aspect of it, given that it's a separate division within the ministry that looks after it. Nonetheless, as you mentioned, there is now a dedicated agency to sort of, bring a full-fledged fab to India, and they have already sort of undertaken quite ambitious efforts there. There's been support from the government in, supporting the fabless ecosystem also, where a design-led incentive scheme was also already introduced sometime last year. So it is, I can assure you, a well thought out approach. Of course, as you yourself know, it's an ambitious feat. It's going to take time. The idea that the fact that we've been able to even bring one to Gujarat since, about 1 year, 1.5 years of the conceptualization of the Indian semiconductor mission to begin with is quite an achievement. Again, if I'm looking at AI chips, if I'm talking about, the AI ecosystem to begin with, again, I've shared the link for the committee report. You can also see the government's interest there to support the development of chips within India and looking at incentive mechanisms to sort of enable that. These are all things that we understand need to happen in a short term. So there's definitely, interest, and there is conviction to that extent. And I think, from a progress perspective, you should hopefully see something in the coming months.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Rajan, I mean, great question. It's one concern that I think most roboticists have with regards to getting silicon chips in our robots from India, but that's a longer term problem. Thanks, Tanvi, for the answer. And I think we're at the last 3 minutes. If anyone wants to ask a question, please go ahead. Okay, Arthur. Yeah, please, Arthur.
Thank you. I'll make this one quick. I've noticed that generally today, especially, it just makes sense that the robotics industry is primarily B2B, where usually the robotics startup or the robotics company is serving, a larger business. For example, if you look at Adverb, they're supporting, like a Flipkart. So how would the government help sort of bridge that sort of demand side so that these startups can find customers with whom they can work so that they can scale?
No, thank you so much for that question, Arthur. And I think that is, as I mentioned, I think hopefully during my slide, that it is an extremely important concern in the ecosystem, right? Because scalability solves for a lot in that sense. And how we approached this was looking at the government in itself as a consumer. And the idea is to sort of enable that through public procurement policies, or like this concept of a technology adoption plan where we say, sit with the Ministry of Agriculture and figure out what use cases we can prioritize, providing fiscal incentives to, say, farmers to adopt those technologies. So we're looking at, of course, government as a consumer in itself. We're also looking at de-risking the technology, demystifying it, so that there is also an appetite within the industry to adopt that, right? And the rest of the recommendations focus towards that. But one important recommendation, which we think will be more high impact, will be this robotics utilization plan, where we plan on looking at these high potential industries, assessing the business processes within these industries which could integrate robotics, and then building capacity to integrate robotics within them, right? So we do want to be high impact, especially from a demand side, because we do believe that scalability will definitely help address a lot of the issues in terms of the maturity of the ecosystem. So that is a consideration we've taken in for the strategy.
That sounds really great. Thank you.
So I think just to continue Arthur's point, right, Tanvi, I'll just sort of try to drive it home. There are two major suggestions towards the implementation side that I'd like to put up. One being through the public procurement policies or the measures that we spoke about, right? The current way that the government procures from particularly smaller companies, because of course the bigger ones have direct access. But I don't think there are best effort yet. We've seen through so much with the e-commerce revolution. We know things can be a bit better on the public procurement side. So I think that is one area, maybe if there are experts who can actually help us to get through that. And the second being the n number of committees that we'd now be required to form for all the reforms, or to get actually the certification, standardizations and all things going. It would just be a request. Maybe I'm speaking in terms or representing the entire startup ecosystem at this moment. But with robotics being such a nascent field, I do believe that startups would be able to give you more inputs and more information when compared to your legacy companies who are just venturing into robotics, because we see the brunt of situations firsthand every other day with pretty much all kinds of fields, right? So it will just be a request to have developers or newer new age companies towards the focus as well while forming these committees, so that things are more useful for pretty much everybody across the board. So yeah, that's it.
No, absolutely. I'll take your second half of the question first. I think, in the consultation process in itself, and I think Kaushik could, bear testament to that, a lot of the folks that we spoke to were from the startup ecosystem, largely because of being the primary benefactors in that sense, right? For the reasons that you mentioned. So we do understand the need to, make this a very startup focused, startup friendly sort of initiative also. And of course, the beginning of it was just to sort of take feedback from the ecosystem and how to sort of draft this strategy, but the larger role of the ecosystem comes into the implementation side. So I'm glad to have this as a touch point for having to get to speak to you all, and also sort of building a space where we're able to sort of take feedback and also understand your perspectives, and we'd like to sort of carry it forward. I think the plugin alliance for that for matter was like a touch point for us, but in any other way you'd also want to sort of personally interact, those lines of communication are open, and we'll definitely ensure that these committees and these sort of initiatives are kept inclusive. From the procurement side of things, again, usually how these are drafted is through consultation, given that at the end of the day, these need to be sort of supporting a certain ecosystem. So given that robotics is in that sense a multidisciplinary technology, the approach in this would probably also be different from say how typical hardware would be also sort of sourced, right? So we'll ensure that during the formulation of such procurement policies, these things are kept into mind, and we'll of course also make it consultative.
Just to add on to what Pallavi said, I think, I mean, the 4 sectors that the policy recognizes are great. And just to draw inspirations for the other sectors, the 3 sectors, the defense sector is, I think it is a bit ahead when it comes to this, when it comes to procurement, because of schemes like the IDEX scheme and, the government e-marketplace that they have, which puts on tenders and, basically it puts it on the market that, okay, compete for it and you may get it. Obviously, there are some complaints with that also, that the process is not the easiest. But I think, agriculture and healthcare, as Sarvesh mentioned earlier, these things, if we can enable a structure like IDEX or, where basically competitive tendering can happen for agriculture and healthcare, that would really help, because we do need to build those ecosystems either way. We need to build a healthcare robotics ecosystem, either in the form of service or surgical robots, and in agriculture, obviously, because a lot of our population is engaged in it, whereas they should be, shifting more towards skilled jobs, and this can be taken over by robots.
Right, no, I think it's a very fair point, and I'd also like to put forth that we have considered, say, initiatives such as IDEX while even conceptualizing the RIU to begin with. So the intent is definitely there. From a sectoral perspective, of course, mandates are split across different line ministries. So it will make sure that the RIU operates as an aggregator of efforts in that sense, working with the Ministry of Agriculture and Health there. Again, yeah, of course, this becomes more implementation focused, but how their specific procurement policies would be is something that we'll have to work on. I agree that there would be a need to ensure that sectoral representation is maintained. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tanvi, for the answer as well as all your time today. I think we can conclude now. We'll end this session for today. This was the allotted time that we had. Thank you, everyone, for joining and, being here for the past 1.5 hours. I think it was a helpful discussion for both ends, both for the people who are attending as well as Tanvi. Probably, there's some, complaints that we could get through to you. So I hope that was helpful. And lastly, I would just like to make a shameless plug. Please come to Roscon India for discussions like this. Our aim with this whole event has been, for the past 4 to 5 months that we've been doing this, is to have more conversations like this in person. And since we are ROS practitioners, so that's the way that we are trying to get people together. So humbly requesting all of you to please come to the event so that such discussions can be had more in person, and that can lead to, further initiatives from the robotics ecosystem. That's all I have to say. And yeah, thank you so much. Pallavi, if any parting comments, please go ahead. Otherwise.
No, I think it's been a healthy discussion, and Tanvi, thank you for being such a sport with it. Because, yeah, I mean, to me, fairly, I'm very scared of, government policies or government officials. Like, okay, how am I even going to speak to them? Are they even going to listen to it? But yeah, you've been such a sport in taking all of our questions and queries. And thank you, everybody here, for taking 1.5 hours of your precious time to actually put in suggestions through the whole thing. We'll be more than excited to see you all at Roscon and have many more discussions like these. And I think, Tanvi, it'd be a personal invite to you as well, if you'd want to be there, to just share your comments and share your view about the whole thing, because it's about 2 months from now. A lot would have already changed through the suggestions that the entire community would be giving. So yeah, see you all. Thank you so much. Have a good day ahead.
Okay then. Tanvi, if any comments, or otherwise we can end this.
Right. No, thank you so much for giving me the time, and sort of also your recommendations. It's extremely important right now, given that we've opened this strategy up for consultation, and honestly, the success of it lies in active participation and engagement from the ecosystem. So this has been a great platform, and I'm sure the Roscon will be just another such great initiative to continue such conversations, and we'll be happy to attend and continue conversing and updating you on what the government's intentions are and how this sort of strategy matures. So yeah, thank you so much for the Roscon team.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.